Hi there, this is Spencer from B&P Conversions. Just making this quick little video, just a little tip for some of the people that obviously may have this trouble. This is a 3-litre diesel X5, and with this car, the customer was, you can see it's on a 2007. With this car, it came in with a few fault codes. Primarily what was actually happening was the car was driving along, and all of a sudden the car would just literally stall. So the engine revs would die, the car would stall, and it would turn itself off. You'd go through the process of turning the key off, taking the key out, putting the key back in, start the engine, and it would drive for another 6 feet before it would die again. Sometimes it was quite sporadic. It would die once, allow you to drive another quarter of a mile, and then die again. Other times it was a case of it would die literally as soon as you start the engine would then die and switch off. Now, when I first plugged the fault code reader in, I've got a launch, which is what I use for all my BMW stuff. When I first plugged the fault code reader in, the code that came up was injector cylinder 5 activation. So the code for that, that was, I can't remember the exact number, but yeah, it said DDE injector cylinder 5 activation. So there were a couple other codes, 3 for a glow plug code. So I decided to replace the glow plugs, remove the inlet manifold, and remove the injector. This had the later type Bosch injectors in, so what actually happened there was the company which I usually have my diesel injectors rebuilt by, they do all the previous injectors in all the 3 litres for me, the common rail injectors. But because Bosch are the only suppliers of these injectors in these later BMWs, it's either Bosch direct, Bosch will recondition them, I believe they're about £219 each, or you can buy a brand new replacement unit, which is hell law money if you add up times 6, so it's going to be a very expensive job. So anyway, going back to it, I sent the injector off to the diesel company who normally rebuild them for me. They were able to test run the injector on their bench. They preheated the diesel to 40 degrees and then ran the diesel through. The injector spray was perfect. They contacted me and said there's no issue with the injector at all. So I then started to worry that this cylinder 5 activation code was down to the wiring in the from the ECU to the actual engine. So I had an auto electrician come out. He basically tested the wires from the ECU to the injectors, found there was no issue with any of the continuity of any of the wires. There was no issue with the wiring loom at all. So it was back to sort of the drawing board. So what I done was obviously put it all back together and leave the engine running, allow it, trying to make it do what it did to the customer. So after about half an hour of the engine running on idle, I went to get in it, turn the engine on, the engine was running, turn the heater on, and literally instantly the engine died. So what I done then was I went into my fault code reader. I actually tried to start the engine, so bearing in mind the ignition was still on, it just literally dropped back onto ignition. So when the engine died, it turned back onto the ignition. So all I had to do each time was put my foot on the brake and press the start button. But as you can hear, the engine doesn't want to start. So we take a foot off the brake pedal, and when you read the fault codes, you'll see I have injector cylinder 1 activation code. Now if I go back and I clear this code, and that says clear code complete, if I now go to put my foot on the brake and press start, the engine will start and then die. So that is the symptoms we were getting, and the code was cylinder 5 activation. So if I go back to my read fault codes, you can see that it's come up with injector cylinder 1 activation. So what I did after the engine misbehaved on me is I actually took the inlet manifold off again, swapped injectors over from cylinder 5 to cylinder 1. So the next step, in my mind, was swap the injectors over, see if the fault follows the injector. If it does, then the injector is at fault. If the fault stayed at cylinder 5, it could have been a diode in the ECU or a problem with the ECU, and it would have had to have gone back to a BMW main dealer to either have a new ECU and reprogrammed, or perhaps have the ECU sent off to someone who's reliable who can repair them. So luckily in this case the ECU wasn't at fault. So the main problem what was at fault was the injector itself. So you can see what I done was I unbolted the injector, took the injector from cylinder 5, placed it in cylinder 1, and now the fault, I've ran the engine the same amount of time, around about half an hour, which I would think, I would imagine that there's an internal mechanical failure of the injector, because it only happens when the injector's warm. So the engine center, which obviously tested the injector, tested it at around about 40 degrees, but when the engine's up to operating temperature, you're around about 80 degrees, so you double the temperature. And I'm expecting that there's something that's either going to be expanding inside the injector, something's failing inside the injector as the injector's getting hot. So again, with this code, you can see it's current. I'm going to try and start the engine again. No joy. If I come back out of this, clear fault code memory, complete, foot on brake. There we go, and she starts. Now this is again, like I was explaining, it's so sporadic. Sometimes it can die instantly, other times it can, run for 20 seconds, run dry for a mile before it dies again. So obviously I'm just trying to make this video and mainly help people out, because I've spent a lot of time and effort taking this manifold off 2 or 3 times, switching this injector over. Even the company which rebuilds these injectors all the time haven't ever had this code, and they said to me that they would expect the ECU to be at fault and not the injector. So this is quite a current thing. Obviously there are hundreds of these cars on the road. This engine's fitted into every 3-litre diesel BMW out there virtually. And these new injectors, this is the type of fault that they're giving to understand, so you understand what you're looking for. Because I could have quite easily next took the ECU off, sent it away, spent another 150 quid having it tested, and it would have been a waste of money and money down the drain. So first of all, like I said, the first codes I had were injector 5 cylinder activation. You can see the 410 4410 on the side there, and some glow plugs. So obviously cured the glow plugs by fitting the module on the glow plugs, removed them fault codes off the ECU, because obviously these engines won't regen, and they just get clogged up if they've got any fault code stored. So you must rectify fault codes, because obviously then your particle filter will get blocked, and that's a world of pain and very expensive if you end up going down that road. So if you have a stalling problem on a BMW diesel and they're modern Bosch injectors, by what I mean by modern Bosch injectors is I'll take you to the engine, let you have a look at the top of the injectors now. So I'm just going to turn the ignition off. 1 second. Before I turn the ignition off, I'm going to clear the code. Yep, clear code complete. And then I'm going to end session. So I'm ending session, confirm. This tells me not to leave my little bit plugged in down there. So that's not talking to the ECU anymore. I can turn the ignition off, take the key out so we don't run the battery down. So the new type injectors, let me just pop the bonnet. Now these injectors are made by Bosch, like I've said before, and how you can recognise the new type of injector is they have little white caps on the very top. Now again, this was something which is quite difficult to remove if you don't know what you're doing. You can see that this little white cap and that little white sleeve, that's all one piece. And how I can explain this is you put a screwdriver in underneath the lip of this cap, and you lever off this bar, and you also lift at the same time here. So as you lever down with the screwdriver, lift here, this whole white section will come up as a sleeve. So it's a sleeve basically fitted over these black parts. Once that sleeve has come up, you can then grab a hold of the black part and wiggle it up as well. So this white piece, this whole white piece actually moves up and down on top of that black piece. Okay, so how you can recognize whether you've got new type Bosch injectors is the injector, its plug is in a different position. So you can see this plug actually comes out and underneath the manifold, but the main thing that you can tell the new type injectors is these little bleed off pipes. You have these white capped bleed off pipes and the pipe fitting to it. So all them little caps are a sign that obviously you have the new type of Bosch injectors. Alright, so to replace these or even remove these injectors, it's a manifold off job. When you're taking your manifold off, again, if you're deciding to take your manifold off, there are swell flaps under most of these engines. So in the manifold there's swell flaps. You have 2 intake tubes per cylinder. Alright, so there's 12 inlets basically, and on 6 of those inlets there's a thing called a swell flap, and I suggest that you delete them whilst you're there. Remove the swell flap. There's a kit you can buy off eBay. You're either going to be 32mm or 33mm swell flap deletes, and I believe there is a different size, but I can't remember the different size. But the telltale of how to know whether there's a swell flap, whether there's swell flaps underneath your manifold, is there is an actual little valve. So you can see past the manifold where my finger is. This valve, if it's not present on your manifold, you don't have swell flaps, because some of the cars came out of the factory without swell flaps in the manifold, and some of them came with swell flaps. So with this electrical plug and the little valve with 2 vacuum lines going to and from, if that's in situ, clipped to the manifold, you have swell flaps. If it's not in situ and not clipped to the manifold, you don't have swell flaps. Okay, you can also check with a mirror. If you get a mirror and hold a mirror down under there, there's a stainless steel bar all the way along the bottom of the manifold, attached to a diaphragm at that end. The diaphragm is obviously controlled by this little solenoid down here, like I just said. So the vacuum pipe comes from the engine to the solenoid opens with the ECU, and then it sucks the vacuum into the diaphragm. It sucks the vacuum out of the diaphragm here and operates the swell flaps. Okay, so there's a stainless steel bar. If you hold a mirror down under here, you shouldn't see a stainless steel bar attached to the bottom of the manifold, which is another telltale sign. Make sure you do those whilst that manifold's off, and check for glow plug fault codes. If you have a glow plug fault code, do your glow plugs at the same time for the sake of it. There's a module underneath the main water pipe. So this main water pipe, there's a glow plug module just situated underneath that pipe, and it's easier to disconnect this pipe off the cylinder head. It comes off and there's a Y in it as soon as it comes off the head. There's 3 bolts that hold it on. Disconnect them 3 bolts. You can buy the gasket from BMW, buy the gasket for the water pipe, remove the water pipe, fit the new glow plug module, which is directly under the water pipe, and then put the new gasket in and bolt it down. They're common for leaking. They can leak over the modules and they can damage the modules. So let's swell flap delete, do your glow plugs, glow plug module, and you have to have the manifold off to change the injector. I hope this helps someone. Sorry the video is a bit long, just trying to squeeze as much information on these new diesels as I can to help you out as much as I can. Okay, if it's any use, give me a like. I have a Facebook page. My company is BMP Conversions. We do a lot of classic restoration, modification, engine conversions, performance stuff, race car builds. You can see, you know, there's a race car on the ramp, full restoration there, M3 body conversion there. So that's the sort of stuff we do, but I do service work as well. And yeah, feel free, if you want some work done, give us a call. My number is 01328 701 633. Thank you from Spencer.